Linguistics is the scientific study of language. Linguists are people who are specialists in linguistics and they work on specific languages. But their primary goal is to understand the nature of the language in which they find answers for the following questions. 1. What distinguishes human language from other animal communication systems? 2. What features are common to all human languages? 3. How are the modes of linguistic communication, that is speech, writing, sign language of the deaf, related to each other? 4. How is language related to other types of human behavior? The main goal of the study of linguistics in an academic setting, like all other intellectual disciplines, is to increase our knowledge and understanding of the world. However, since language is universal and fundamental to all human interactions, the knowledge attained in linguistics has many practical applications. Linguists with some training in other appropriate disciplines would thus be prepared to seek answers to questions such as: 1. How can a previously unstudied language be analyzed and written? 2. How can foreign languages best be taught and learned? 3. How can speech be synthesized on a computer? 4. How can a computer be programmed to understand human speech? 5. How can the language problems of people with speech abnormalities be analyzed and rectified? Linguistics can be divided into 3 categories: form of the language, meaning of the language, context of the language. On dealing with the first subcategory, the form of the language, or commonly called grammar, it describes the rules to be followed by the user to form the language. It also consists of the study of composing the words, also the composition of phrases and sentences that form these words. The branch of linguistics is also related to a field called phonetics, which is the study of speech sound and non-speech sounds, their formation and uses. It also includes the study of words and concepts that makes meaning. This study is called semantics. Also, another study called pragmatics, which deals how meaning is produced from context. Language is a phenomenon with many layers, from the sounds that comes out with the meanings those sounds express. The field of linguistics is composed of subfields, and most professional linguists become specialists in one or more of those subfields. The major subfields are the following. This is the study of speech sounds themselves. It is a branch of linguistics that comprises the study of the sounds of human speech in the case of sign languages. It is concerned with the physical properties of speech sounds or signs, their physiological production, acoustic properties, auditory perception, and neurophysiological status. Phoneticians study both the production of speech sounds by the human speech organs and the properties of the sounds themselves. Phoneticians are concerned with such questions as follows. 1. What are the sounds among all those that humans could make that actually exist in the world's language? 2. What specially defines different accents? 3. What are the properties of sounds that would go into computerized speech synthesis? This is the study of the organization of language sounds. It is concerned with the abstract grammatical characterization of systems of sounds or signs. Phonologists are concerned with questions such as the following. 1. What sounds contrast in one language but not another? 2. What sounds of language can or cannot occur one after the other? 3. How do poets or writers or song lyrics initiatively know how to match the rhythm of speech? This is the study of the makeup of words. It is the study of the structure and content of word forms. Morphologists study such questions as the following. 1. To what extent are ways of forming words productive? 2. What determines when words change form? 3. How can we get a computer to recognize the root of a word separated from its affixes? This is the study of how phrases and sentences larger than the word are constructed. Syntacticians address such questions as the following. 1. How can the number of sentences we could be infinite in number even though the number of words in any language is finite? 2. What is it that makes a sentence like visiting relatives can be boring, ambiguous? 3. How can languages express the same thoughts even though they construct their sentences indifferent? 4. How can a computer be programmed to analyze the structure of sentences? This is the study of meaning. Linguistic semantics is the study of meaning that is used for understanding human expression through language. Other forms of semantics include the semantics of programming languages and formal logics. Semanticists answer such questions as the following. 1. How do we know what words mean? 2. What is the basis of metaphor? 3. What makes sentences have more than one meaning? 4. How do we know that in fact he did lie? 5. How many meanings can be found in a sentence? It is the study which describes about the origin of the language, its change over decades, and also details the change in language around the world. It helps to detail the language pronunciation, etc. It is also the study of how languages change over time. It helps to develop general theories about how and why language changes and also to describe the history of speech communities, to study the history of words, that is, etymology. Sociolinguistics is the descriptive study of the effect of any and all aspects of society, including cultural norms, expectations and context, on the way language is used and the effects of language use on society. Sociolinguistics differs from sociology of language in that the focus of sociolinguistics is the effect of the society on the language, while the sociology of language focuses on language's effect on the society. Sociolinguistics overlaps to a considerable degree with pragmatics. It is historically closely related to linguistic anthropology. It also studies how language varieties differ between groups separated by certain social variables and how creation and adoption to these rules is used to categorize individuals in social or socio-economic classes. Psycholinguistics is the study of psychological and neurobiological factors that enable humans to acquire, use, comprehend, and produce language. Initial forecasts of psycholinguistics were largely philosophical ventures due mainly to a lack of cohesive data on how the human brain functioned. Modern research makes use of biology, neuroscience, cognitive science, linguistics, and information theory to study how the brain processes language. There are a number of subdisciplines with non-invasive techniques for studying the neurological workings of the brain. Psycholinguistics covers the cognitive processes that make it possible to generate a grammatical and meaningful sentence out of vocabulary and grammatical structures, as well as the processes that make it possible to understand utterances, words, text, etc. Developmental psycholinguistics describes how children can learn to speak and understand the language of their environment as quickly and effortlessly as they do, or how people with pathological language problems differ from people who have normal language. This is the study of the actual encoding of language in the brain, addressing such questions as what parts of the brain different aspects of language are stored in, how language is actually stored, what goes on physically in the brain when language is processed, or how the brain compensates when certain areas are damaged. Researchers are drawn to the field from a variety of backgrounds, bringing along a variety of experimental techniques as well as widely varying theoretical perspectives. Much work in neurolinguistics is informed by models in psycholinguistics and theoretical linguistics and is focused on investigating how the brain can implement the processes that theoretical and physiological propose are necessary in producing and comprehending language. Neurolinguistics study the physiological mechanisms by which the brain processes information related to language and evaluate linguistic and psycholinguistic theories. Learning and understanding a language involves computing the properties of language that are described in phonology, syntax, and semantics from what is heard. The challenge of describing how this is possible connects linguistics with computational issues at a very fundamental level. How could syntactic structures be computed from spoken language? How are semantic relations recognized? And how could these computational skills be acquired? Computational linguists attempt to answer these questions. We have seen that linguists think of linguistic items as having fixed and stable properties. Among other things, inner literal meanings. This way of looking at linguistic phenomena as objects is coupled with a very popular model of linguistic communication, that is, the one which portrays the communication process as the conveyance of message, or in other words, some kind of transportation of a certain fixed message from the speaker to the listener, a transfer of given thoughts and feelings as if these thoughts and feelings were independent processes in communication. This view is associated with the metaphor that meanings are objects. Linguistic expressions are objects. Linguistic expressions have meanings. In communication, a speaker sends a fixed meaning to a hearer through the linguistic expression associated with that meaning. The view that communication is basically a transfer or transportation of fixed messages shows up in many disguises under several different but related metaphors. Common to this and many other theories of linguistic communication is the view that words, sentences, and other expressions are containers loaded with meaning or the content that words are. In other words, meaningful. Linguists tend to have rather definite preferences for certain theories of linguistic meaning and communication. These theories are certain implicit evaluations of which communicative functions are most important and most characteristics of language. In this broad overview, we may distinguish between functions along three different dimensions. First of all, one should single out the dialogic functions in social interaction from the monologistic functions in thinking and other kinds of intra-individual communication. Secondly, it is possible to focus on the different interacting factors of the communication process and discern the following four aspects. A. Focusing on the sender. The expressive functions. What is communicated is, under this aspect, seen as expressions of the sender's beliefs, views, feelings, attitudes, volitions, needs, etc. Naturally, some of these are unconscious to the sender and thus not intended by him. B. Focusing on the receiver, the evocative functions. Communication is here seen as directed towards evoking certain reactions on the receiver's part. What is conveyed serves to make him perceive or understand something, have certain feelings and attitudes, or perform a certain action. C. Focusing on the subject matter, on the imaginary or objective reality that the message refers to the referential functions. We are then concerned with how communication is used to refer and describe, to analyze, argue about, and explain things in the world. D. Focusing on the relation between sender and receiver, the social functions. From this point of view, communication serves to establish and maintain social contact between the communicating parties. A great deal of oral discourse takes place simply because social situations and conventions require it, perhaps because one feels obliged to avoid an embarrassing silence. Some speak of the phonic function of language. Thirdly, we shall relate communication to different psychological dimensions of the communicating parties. There seem to be at least three different aspects. A. The cognitive functions which have to do with knowledge, beliefs, and intellectual understanding. From the expressive point of view, communication may be seen as expressing the views and beliefs of the sender, and in an evocative perspective, communication is viewed as directed towards arousing beliefs, conveying information, and bringing about understanding. B. The emotive functions in communication. The sender express his feelings, attitudes, emotions, and desires, and this may also evoke the corresponding states and activities in the receiver. C. The practical functions. Much communication is used for guiding the behavior of the receiver, that is, the messages are conveyed in the hope of arousing a readiness in the receiver to act in certain ways. Most linguistic messages are multifunctional, although many are specialized in various ways so as to stress certain particular aspects. Translation theories of linguistic communication suggest a separation between the content and the expression of the linguistic message. Early in the process, we find the thoughts and representations which directly encode or are even equal to the content of the message, and only later the whole message gets transformed into phonetic behavior. The message and its meaning is given an outer form. The comprehension process is essentially the reverse. The listener starts with the expression and ends up with the content. There are three elements in the philosophy underlying translation theories of comprehension. A. The thesis that speech or linguistic products in general are nothing but expressions of thoughts and ideas. B. The thesis that content and form may be ripped apart as two independent phenomena. C. The thesis that messages and their meanings or interpretations are mental entities, that is, things existing in the inner world of our minds. It is characteristics of linguistics that the direct associations between thinking and meaning on the one hand and linguistic form on the other are cut off. Thoughts are assumed to exist independent of and prior to language. First, we think and organize meaning, then we speak and transfer the message. But this is not the only unfortunate separation in traditional linguistic philosophy, another separation inherent. Language stands in opposition to utterance in the same way as does that which is social to that which is individual. Such a theory is entirely inadequate as a background for understanding spoken dialogues. Communication in normal speech situations is an inherently social enterprise, a complex interaction in which the various moves of the agents involved can never be understood from a purely individual perspective. Semiotics is usually defined as the study of signs. Communication is necessarily based on various forms of signing and signaling, and semiotics is therefore at least potentially of vital interest for communication theory. The philosophical difficulties inherent in the theory of mental representations and images have already aligned to it. The right to making informed choices about educational options for their child with hearing loss. It can sometimes be overwhelming and frustrating to understand these options. Several guidances are provided to parents of children with hearing loss. Educational options available to children with hearing loss include this type of education. The hearing impaired children are placed in classroom with hearing persons so that they improve in skills and get knowledge. Most schools use it only for selected students with mild to moderate deaf needs, so-called best practice. Specialized services will be provided inside or outside the classroom depending on the type of impairment. Students are led into resource room, leaving the regular class to attend some interactive sessions to receive other related services that might require specialized equipment. This is referred to as speech and language therapy. It is the classroom for children who have difficulty in regular classroom or who need extra help to achieve academically. Most do not have hearing loss at risk. It is usually a language-rich environment for children who are at risk for academic delay. Most do not have hearing loss. Each child has additional goals and objectives selected to meet individual learning needs. Support services may include audiology, individual speech, language therapy, and other services. Classes are team taught by a deaf educator and an early childhood teacher and include children who are hearing and children who are deaf or hard of hearing. Some classes use oral communication, that is, listening and spoken language, and other classes use total communication, that is, listening, spoken language, and sign language. Children with hearing loss are taught through primarily visual channels. Sign language is the main communication mode. This is an environment exclusively for children with hearing loss. Children who do not have a hearing loss do not typically attend state schools for the deaf. Children with hearing loss are taught using simultaneously signed and spoken language. Instruction occurs in self-contained classrooms for children with hearing loss and for some children in mainstream classroom settings with a sign language interpreter. Most public school programs for children with hearing loss are total communication programs. Children with hearing loss are taught using spoken language that is supplemented visually with phonetically based hand cues. Cued speech instruction or interpretation usually occurs within a regular education classroom with hearing peers. Children with hearing loss learn to listen and speak without relying on signs and cues. They are instructed academically using oral communication. These methods are generally referred to oral education, that is, listening and speaking the languages. These methods stronger the belief that the deaf children can learn without their families' non-compulsion to learn sign languages. Since most of the communicative methods include parental cooperation, which is sometimes impossible. As we have discussed most of the educative methods and programs above here, we are discussing the communicative options. There are three important methods which provide effective communication. 1. Sign language. It is the visual mode of primary communications. It is also commonly said that the first language of the children, whereas the verbal language is the second language that is learnt in schools. The lip reading is one of the supporting systems when a person communicates with the non-hearer. Indian Sign Languages believes that a child with hearing impairment uses this language effectively. It also serves as a first language and forms the base for other languages. Benefits. Since it is a visual manual language, it is easily understood by the non-hearer. When the language development takes place at the correct age, then other developments will be right. Visual communication is easier because it could be learnt without struggle and gives a pleasure in communicating. Since sign language facilitates the education methods, it gives the positive impact. Concerns. When children are born with hearing problem, they learn the sign language easily, so the children with sudden effect find it difficult. Learning sign language is inadequate in India. It uses the oral methods for communication. It considers the listening and speaking as prime mode of communication. By using the hearing aids and by the training given, the child is trained for listening to the language. When this listening training becomes successful by the children, teachers and parents collectively, the child is able to develop its speaking skills. These listening and speaking skills help the children to learn the school subjects. Benefits. It leads to better participation in cultural and social activities. Leads to easy learning. Leads to independent communication which do not involve any translators. Facilitate the educational development. Concerns. Even though this training supports the communication, but it is not done vigorously in India. New technology has been introduced in hearing aids, but it does not reach Indians quickly as far and it's costly to afford. It gives continuous training for basic communication, which may sometimes create a negative impact. The oralism progress is very slow, since slow improvement adequate speech is not available. 3. Total communication. It is the combination of listening and speaking mode and forms the primary mode of communication. Sign system is also used with oral mode. Speech reading is generally used as a support system. Benefits. Since it is the combination, the benefits of above two methods are obtained. We have discussed in detail about the communication methods and the learning process. It also details the teaching and learning process. In this process, the objectives or the goals are set by the institution for the children and they take the necessary steps to attain those objectives. This can be attained by teaching process or by personal interest and also by parental care. Teaching methods may include most of the new techniques in the field and also monitor whether the objectives are achieved. It is the family who should support the children and not to put in stress and admit them in this appropriate school so that they can gain proper education. There is no doubt that these children have a wide range of knowledge but do not get the field of competing with the normal. So when trained, they explore themselves in heights. Much educational programs should be conducted so that to enhance their level of education. The impaired people should not be treated negatively, which in turn affects not only their education but also personal. In the above educational methods, we have come through some concerns which may act as barriers, so they must be resolved. Also, a main concern is that the technological improvements on the hearing aids have not much evolved in India. This must be taken into account since a developing country like India must not face these types of concerns. All the education methods and communication methods also should be taken into account and should be followed carefully.